a lot of times when I think about faith, I think about like these men and women of faith that I just like, I have admiration and respect for. And I look at them and they make it look easy. But then I look inwardly and I'm struggling with my calling. I'm struggling with whatever. And sometimes it ain't all that easy. And so when Abraham is believing against hope, that means that there's some tension there.
Welcome back to The Move, where we are vibing in and with the book 10 minutes at a time. How you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Happy New Year's, bro.
Yeah, Happy New Year's. We're recording in 2019.
2019. The last 20 episodes, just like to break the fourth wall a little bit, we've been filming these over the course of like 1 week, 20 episodes at a time, because just we actually live in different parts of the country. And last year was the first shoot. And now it's the new year. So wherever you are, whether you're watching in 2019 or some future year, we hope you're having a good time.
Yeah, so Happy New Year to you, wherever you're at.
So with that said, y'all, we're looking at Romans chapter 4, verses 16 to 25. It's crazy to me to think that, John, you actually wanted to skip this one. Like we straight up went all the way up to verse 14. In our last one, you're like, nah, bro, we'll just skip 16 to 25 and start new in chapter 5. And I'm like, bro, no.
That is a slanderous truth.
Slanderous truth. Obviously I've been spending a lot of time in this chapter over the last couple of weeks. Yeah. And as I've been going through it, I was just like, no, this is so good. Like there's bread here, bro.
There's a lot of good stuff here. There's a lot of good stuff here, and I'm glad we're going to pause and consider it.
Yeah. So before we dive in, the question is,
have you read it?
If not, go read it. We'll wait right here.
Right here. We're here.
All right, as always, 10 minutes are on the clock. 3, 2, 1.
And
let's go.
So what strikes you? I know that you were advocating for this passage quite hard.
Yeah. Okay,
tell me, what is it that resonates?
There's an awesome lesson here in this section of the text where Abraham is living out what faith looks like. And what blows my mind is, Abraham is this man of faith. He's the guy. But when you look at his life lived, when you look at the example of his story, like things are kind of shady. Like there's some questionable moments and gray moments. And yet, as you read this passage, the Bible has nothing but good things to say about his faith. His faith, I think the language is that it's an unwavering faith. Yeah.
And this wavering faith, I like the setup because what precedes this is, it begins with, in verse 13, what precedes it actually, what we're doing, for the promise to Abraham and his offspring. So it's a promise, right? And that promise is realized through faith. And it's the sort of faith that I know that you really like this phrase, as do I, that hoped against hope.
Yes. And I love the insight into that phrase, because a lot of times when I think about faith, I think about like these men and women of faith that I just like, I have admiration and respect for. And I look at them and they make it look easy. But then I look inwardly and I'm struggling with my calling. I'm struggling with whatever. And sometimes it ain't all that easy. And so when Abraham is believing against hope, that means that there's some tension there.
So if we could maybe simplify it for modern English language, that idea of hope against hope, although that's a phrase that we use quite often and we know, colloquialism.
Sure.
It ends up, I think, just meaning something along the lines of expecting against the expected expectation. Right?
I don't think you simplified it.
That's super easy. It's super easy. Think about it. It's you expecting something against the expected expectation. So usually when you're driving 100 and you get stopped by a cop and it's 70 miles an hour, you expect a ticket. But as you're waiting in the car,
you're hoping against hope.
And you're expecting against the common expectation, and he shows up and he gives you $100.
Yeah, that's a little weird.
And watch, and you're not surprised. That's the expectation against the expectation.
Yeah.
We together?
Yeah.
So Abraham, the story of Abraham, he gets called out of Ur of the Chaldeans, and he travels with his wife, who's a half-sister, who we'll kind of talk about. He travels with Lot, which is a nephew of his, and they leave Ur of the Chaldeans, and through the course of their story, they end up going to Egypt because of a famine, and they're in Egypt, and when they're in Egypt, Sarah is taken into the harem of the king, the Pharaoh, and Abraham has already this plan of saving his own skin because he knows that Sarah's super beautiful. And he says, hey, make sure you tell Pharaoh that you're my sister, not my wife, so that they don't kill me. Well, there's that half lie, half truth thing that happens. And as they leave Egypt, because subsequently God intercedes for Abraham and Pharaoh ends up suffering this disease. Read it. It's there in Genesis. But anyway.
Interesting in that story, Pharaoh demonstrates more faith than Abraham does in that moment.
At least more integrity. Right?
Okay,
at least
fair
more
enough.
integrity. And as they leave, they came in, just Sarah and Abraham and his companions and everybody else, Lot and the like. But then they leave Sarah, Abraham, and Hagar. Mm-hmm. Hagar is going to be very important because Hagar ends up being the handmaiden that Sarah tells Abraham to go into in order to accomplish the promise of having a child, because Sarah knows that her womb is withered, but Hagar, who in the patriarchal language is an extension of herself, so it's not adultery.
Okay.
Right? She's my handmaiden.
A little
weird. But Abraham goes into her, believing that by going into Hagar, he's bringing about the promise.
So this is kind of a crazy idea. We've talked around this idea before, and I think that this is going to challenge a lot of people because most people, when they look at the story of Hagar, it's a moment of fault. It's not a pretty picture that's being painted around him. And you're saying that this is perhaps an exercise of a certain kind of faith, maybe not a great faith.
Well, what's the usual story we tell? That it's the moment where Abraham doubts. It's the point where Abraham falls. It's the moment where Abraham's faith wavers. And yet Romans 4 tells us that Abraham's faith, I think it's verse 20, no unbelief made him waver concerning the promise of God, but he grew strong in his faith. And this is the thing, the growth. What was the growth from? It was from this to that. Right? You grow from toddler to teenager to adult. So what was the growth from, although his faith never wavered?
Yeah. So there's a certain sense that faith can be unwavering and also immature.
Yes.
At the same time, which is kind of weird because when we see unwavering faith, we think, oh, it's at 100%. It's perfect.
Because it's always just faith.
Yeah, but clearly that's not the example because here he does this thing that is against God's will in the story, right?
Yep.
And that's made clear.
Yep.
Later on in the story, when God's like, no, that was not it. There's this other way I'm going to do it, and it's actually the way that's ideal.
Yep.
What does he do? He laughs. He
laughs.
actually, the Bible says, he falls on his face
and
laughing.
Laughs. Yeah, Genesis 17.
And yet somehow his faith doesn't waver. And that's kind of what I really pulled from this passage is how does that work? Because I look at my life and there are things that God tells me. There are things that I see in the text and I'm just like that just seems so
absurd.
Ludicrous, absurd. And yet when I see other people doing that, when I see Abraham doing that, he still has an unwavering faith, but that's also held in tension with the idea that his faith is growing and he's hoping against hope.
So let's talk about this continuum of faith rather quickly in Abraham's story. So Abraham believes the promise. It's counted to him as righteousness. But he has what we would say, what we're talking about, an immature faith.
Right.
How does that immature faith look like? Well, God tells him, I am going to do this. You are going to have a child. Abraham says, okay, I believe it. But as his situation progresses and he continues to age and Sarah doesn't have a child, and when she leaves Egypt with Hagar, the light bulb goes off and he says, well, maybe this is what God meant by having a child with Sarah.
Yeah.
Because Hagar's her extension.
Yeah.
So if I go into Hagar, then that's how the promise will come along. Notice, he's motivated by his belief and his faith in the promise, and yet he's trying to accomplish it in his own strength and in his own machinations, right? His own strategery.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so this is an immature faith. When you receive the word, you believe the word, but then you try to accomplish the word with your own sort of influence, impulses, or strategeries.
This is why this story is so rich to me, because I feel like Abraham at times, but his example in this text shows us that there's a difference between unbelief and, what's the word?
Disbelief.
Disbelief, yeah. It's okay to wrestle with and doubt, in a certain sense of doubting, to wrestle with this, to have this, okay, God, I believe, but help my unbelief kind of a feeling.
And we see this in the New Testament when you look at the announcement of John the Baptist's birth and contrast with the announcement of Jesus' birth. The announcement for John the Baptist is given to his father, Zechariah, and his response is, how will I know?
Yeah.
Right? Because he doesn't believe. He's like, well, how will I know? As in this posture of unbelief. Gabriel comes in to the sanctuary.
How about this, dude? Like, there's an angel from God who's talking to you.
Yeah, Zechariah is functioning as a priest. Angel comes in, reveals it to him. He's like, well, how will I know? I'm right here. I'm an angel,
hello.
right? And then Gabriel appears to Mary, and Mary, her response is, how will this be?
Yeah.
Right? Because that's
It's
the
not
question.
that she doubts God.
No.
She's just like, okay, I don't know how all the pieces line up together.
Because I'm a virgin.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's that difference between, well, how will I know versus how's this going to be? And that's Abraham's response after Ishmael is born.
Mm-hmm. And God says, no, that's not it.
Then Abraham's response in Genesis is like, well, how will this be?
Yeah.
And he falls on his face and he laughs. And what you see there, I believe, is you see a growth and a maturation in faith as he's being confronted with the limitations of his own effort.
Yeah. So here's what I love about this. I got 45 seconds. I gotta have to run through this in my mind. Faith is not dependent upon the strength of it. Your faith is not characterized by the strength of your faith, because it's always going to be faith, whether it's a immature one or a mature type of faith. Faith.
So me receiving the word, the certainty of the word is not promise, is not
it's not based on your feelings.
On my feeling and my receptivity.
Because faith has nothing to do with you as a person or your feelings. Mm-hmm. Faith has everything to do with who you put your faith in. And even if you're hoping against hope, even if your faith is weak, God is sovereign. God is able to accomplish that which he promises. So when the text says that when we share the faith of Abraham, it doesn't mean that we have to have perfect faith.
Yeah.
Even
so we grow in our faith.
We grow in our faith as well.
Yeah. That's good. Man, there's a lot more. We can almost, for somebody who didn't want to do it, now I'm saying we could almost do a part B.
Yeah.
Right?
So sit with that a little bit, guys. Let us know in the comments below what your thoughts are on this. How you see faith interplaying with your life. How you can even share the faith of Abraham. With that said, we'll see you guys tomorrow as we begin Romans chapter 5.
In the next 10 minutes. Peace.